All right. Well, again, thank you everyone so much for being here. My name is Blake Johnson and I am letting someone in the room. My name is Blake Johnson and I'm the Outreach and Inclusion Lead at AM ALS. We're really glad to have everyone here to discuss clinical trial recruitment and retention and the results of the inaugural Action Summit held in 2022. Before I pass things over to Pete Spencer, I wanted to cover just a few housekeeping things, the boring stuff before we jump into the meat of the discussion. So as you've already noticed, this event is being recorded and will be distributed after the event, probably a few days after, along with a post-event resource, which will include a lot of the links that are shared and some of the information that's shared tonight as well. Please mute yourself when you're not speaking. This will just allow for the conversation and presentation to flow without disruptions or any background noise. We definitely encourage everyone to submit questions throughout the presentation via the chat. So if you prefer to remain anonymous when submitting a question, you can direct that question to me via the Zoom direct message feature. We'll be stopping throughout the event to read the comments in the chat, and we'll also answer questions that have been submitted regarding the information covered. So we're not necessarily going to be stopping every slide, but we have a few slides that we've designated as the ones that we'll stop at. So whatever's put in the chat will be read. Questions that are submitted in the chat we will definitely get to as well. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Pete from our clinical trials recruitment and retention team. So Pete, go ahead and take it away.
All right, thank you. I am going to share my screen and make sure I share the right screen. Let's see here. Well, see if this one works. And we'll maximize, start the slideshow. And give me a nod if you can see the slide. All right, see a couple of thumbs up. Thank you very much. Okay. So off we go. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us this evening. This is exciting for the folks who've worked on the AM ALS Action Summit starting at least a year and a half ago and continue the work to this point where now we're starting to communicate the information. And it really is a time where we're trying to shift from identifying issues to action. And that's what this is all about. I do want to take a minute at the start and acknowledge one of our team members, and we're really dedicating this presentation to Becky Morey. I'm sure that many people on this call knew Becky, but if you didn't, she was just a fierce ALS advocate. She had ALS. She passed away from ALS about a month ago. But she was part of the ALS Action Summit, not only in the planning and the follow-up, but she was one of the panelists about a year ago, and we'll talk about how that worked. But so this one's for Becky and all of our team members, and I'll talk more about our team in just a bit. But tonight's about action, but we're going to be presenting a lot of information that will hopefully inspire you to act. A little bit about tonight. You're going to hear some background on the Action Summit. What was it? What inspired it? We'll talk about some of the themes that arose from the rich discussions in the summit and some of the solutions that were identified at the summit, some things to be done to improve the clinical trial environment for everybody, for the people with ALS, as well as the scientists and researchers. We're going to do a few polls later on and just see what your thoughts are in terms of prioritizing some of the actions that were identified. We'll also share some examples of work that's currently underway. You're not starting from square one. Things are underway, but there's a lot of work yet to be done. And then we'll leave time for discussion, not just questions, but also input from you. So as you'll see, there were about 50 people involved in the actual summit itself, about 55 people, but we need to get more input as we go and as we work on these things. So we'll be encouraging that from you later on if you choose. So a little bit about who put the summit on, if you will. It was made up of people from all different stakeholder groups, organizations, companies, government agencies, and so on. But AM ALS was the organization that kind of laid the framework for the summit. And again, you may have heard of AM ALS, and you might be part of their advocacy teams already, but it's an organization, a community that truly is patient-led. It was started by Brian Wallach who has ALS, and his wife, Sandra, who is his caregiver. And they got AM ALS underway, and it has just grown and grown. And most of the people involved in AM ALS are volunteers. They're volunteer advocates, but they're supported by staff at AM ALS, and our work could not get done without them. But basically, what the organization is trying to do is to empower the advocates to raise awareness about ALS, and then lead the revolution against it in driving the development of cures. So that's the broader organization. Now, AM ALS is made up of several working advocacy teams, and the number of teams continues to grow. Our team is the clinical trials recruitment and retention team, and we actually are a relatively small group of folks that split off from the broader clinical trials team. And the recruitment and retention team, we work on basically, as it says, the recruitment and enrollment in clinical trials, and then hopefully getting people to stay in the trials and having the trials complete successfully. So we're looking to lower or remove the barriers to enrollment, to make trials more patient-centric, more humane, and to provide access to everyone who has ALS. And we'll talk about that more in the future. But we do hope that at the end of this, if you hadn't thought about it or weren't aware of us, you might be inclined to follow the link. I believe is in the chat now, and we'll share it in other ways and join us. That would be awesome. So now a little bit about the Action Summit itself. The motivations for this, not in person, a face-to-face summit, I guess it was a virtual summit, kind of arose after a national survey was shared with people with ALS in 2019. It was really shortly after the organization AM ALS started that the survey was created and shared with ALS patients and caregivers. And what's amazing is that I think the number was around 550 people replied to the survey, which is really a huge number when you think of the population of people with ALS trying to reach them and get the surveys back. And the results showed a clear need for improving the knowledge and understanding of clinical trials, more patient-centric trial designs and practices, and improvement of the diversity in trials and the equity I guess, the recruitment for clinical trials to improve access and participation to more people. So that kind of came clearly out of the numbers. But again, these are just surveys that were submitted. And so there was more research going on in the next couple of years, and then the plans were laid for I'll say a face-to-face summit, and that was what resulted was the AM ALS Action Summit in March of 2022. So we'll talk a little bit about that now, the structure of the summit. Again, it took place just almost exactly a year ago, early in March, and you can see in the table on the left that a variety of stakeholders were included, were invited, and there were really some of the leaders in research and government agencies that deal with ALS and other similar diseases. ALS patients, advocates, caregivers, they were all represented, which was really neat to have such a wide variety of stakeholders. The format of the summit really, I think, was what was most powerful. It was split over 2 afternoons. Sometimes one long day people can start to wear out. So there were 2 afternoons consecutive that people met, and a panel started off each day. It was moderated. It was about a half an hour in length, and the topics that the panel discussed really laid the groundwork for the discussion that day, the richer discussions that took place after that. So day 1's topic was finding and getting into clinical trials. So it kind of focused on the recruitment side of clinical trials. Day 2 focused more on the retention side. The question that the panelists were discussing is, what is it like being part of a clinical trial for those folks that got in trial or had a loved one who was in a clinical trial? After that, all the participants in the summit were split up into 5 different breakout groups, and those groups met for about an hour and a half total. There were about 10 people per group, and they focused on 2 questions each day. So they really could get deep into those questions. The groups were somewhat moderated. There were detailed notes taken, which all helped us, which helped us analyze the results after the summit ended. And then the group was, of course, brought back together for sharing. And, that's where the cross-cutting themes came out, the actions, in the discussions, and then bringing it all together. So up next, I want to introduce Tim Lowry. And Tim has been a member of this group, part of the summit. Tim's a member of several advocacy groups. Tim has ALS. He'll be speaking to you using text-to-speak technology and a Tobii computer interface. So Tim, when you are ready, and then you just give me the nod for the slide, for the next slides and so on.
Thank you, Pete. As you can see, we discussed these 4 questions in our breakout groups. Number 1, it's important for people living with ALS and their families to understand about clinical trials. Number 2, increasing racial and ethnic diversity is important, yet we aren't doing a good enough job of addressing this. Number 3, is there a way to improve trial sites without being in charge? Number 4, can we as a community get everyone on the patient-centric train? After analysis of our breakout groups, we discovered 3 cross-cutting themes. The repeated themes were: where and how should we invest in education? How should we be sharing our already excellent existing clinical trials resources the community already have? And finally, are we working together like we should be? The next couple of slides will dive deeper into these themes. What do we mean by patient-centric? Let's watch this doodle created by Kathy called An Extraordinary Advocate. Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you, Tim.
Sorry.
That's okay. We're going to do a stop for anything in the chat, which there is nothing except the link that I put in for the team. So you're good to go, Tim.
Here are several actionable solutions within the invest in education and training cross-cutting theme. Are we reaching the right people with the right tools we already have? How can we do better sharing the tools listed here with others that tell people about clinical trials along with why they are important? Let's work together to educate the relevant stakeholders about the importance of patient-centric practices. Okay, back to you, Pete.
Thank you, Tim. So the second theme that came out of the summit involved creating new, when needed, and evolving existing clinical trial resources. And so some of the solutions that were identified included improving clinical trial databases. Some exist. You'll see some examples of those in just a few minutes. But can they be made more user-friendly? Also, developing some kind of tool that would help link individuals to specific trials. The idea was posed of something like a match.com system, but basically to make it easier for folks to get linked to trials that they would be best for, and vice versa. Also, working with sponsors, drug sponsors, and investigators to improve the clinical trial process will help from this before the trial actually begins, when it comes to helping people understand and comprehend what they're getting into, I guess, related to the informed consent form. And then after the trial, it came out that, people need to hear what happened with the trial. Sometimes results aren't shared, or they're not shared in a timely manner. And then also within the same theme, and very important to the summit, was improving and expanding resources and education to populations who have historically been underrepresented in clinical trials. ALS clinical trials, included along with most other clinical trials. And that includes racial and ethnic minorities, linguistic minorities, people for whom English is not their primary language, and also people who live in areas of the country that are under-resourced, lack of clinics, ALS clinics, and physicians that are aware and deal with ALS very much. So all those are actions under that theme. And then finally, on the theme of collaboration and enhancing collaboration, one of the ways that can be done is creating more patient advisory boards to increase the patient-centric trial design, which we heard about in Kathy's video. Facilitating learning and collaboration to define and share best practices. We heard some really neat things going on at various sites, but not at all sites. So how can we, improve the collaboration to share those best practices? Develop a clinical trial site rating system that would measure, if you will, and rate based on inclusivity and focus on patient-centric practices. And then finally, and importantly, develop protocols to ensure equitable access to clinical trials and inclusivity and diversity in enrollment of patients to clinical trials. So all of these are actions related to the idea of increasing collaboration. And you might already see how some of these are linked to various themes. One thing, we're going to stop now and see if there are any questions that can be, either entered via the chat, or you can just unmute and ask. But speaking of collaboration, I realized I was remiss in not mentioning my teammates. And we have collaborated for the better part of a year and a half now on this. And so I just want to take a second to mention them. And you heard me mention Becky Morey at the beginning. You've met Tim. And I do want to mention Sandy Morris, who was another one of our team members and a great ALS advocate who passed away last August. Lori Andre is one of our team members. You'll be hearing from Jill Bratton in just a bit. And then Maya Vijayaraghavan is also one of our team members. And then just real quickly, our AM ALS support team. You've met Blake tonight. Holly Curtis has helped us, Michael Lecker, Aditi Minkoff, and then Megan Miller, who was the AM ALS science director, had a big role in pulling off the ALS summit. So that maybe gave you some time to think about if you have any questions. So Blake, I'll see if there's any in the chat, and then others can maybe put their hand up or just unmute.
Yeah, we just had one that came through. I think this one's probably for me. So thank you. It was from Allison. Thank you for all of your work, Pete and team. What is IMALS's role in these actions going forward? Allison, that's one of the things we're working through right now. There's a lot of things that came out of the Action Summit in terms of priorities. So the first step is narrowing down some of the actionable solutions and things that can be worked on by various stakeholders, and getting feedback from people who weren't necessarily at the summit, a broader group of people, all different stakeholders, and then deciding what is within scope of IMALS and what is something that maybe we can work with other organizations on. So first step right now is figuring out what we can take on, and what other people outside of just those who attended the Action Summit, what they would like to see move forward on, I guess is the right way to say that. And then we're going to be kind of narrowing down to what is within the scope of IMALS. So not a solid answer, but it's a work in progress. And that's definitely one of the goals of today's presentation and conversation too. I'll just keep talking. Allison just said, thank you, Blake. Some of these things are already in action in other organizations, so it'd be great to collaborate. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's definitely something that we'll be looking to do, because as it sounds like you're aware, Allison, I mean, we don't want to all keep reinventing the wheel. And we just need to reach out, and this is not meant to be an IMALS. Again, the summit had participants from a variety of advocacy organizations, and so we want to expand this and just get it done.
Sorry, thank you. I'm sorry I have my camera off. I'm listening intently. I'm just on 2 calls. So thank you, Pete. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Cool. Anyone else that need clarification? I know we're going through this information very rapidly. Again, a lot of this will be put into the resource that will be sent out after the webinar. But it's a lot to put into 1 hour. But if anyone has questions about the summit or anything, if not, we'll move forward, and maybe there'll be some in a few minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And Lori had just said exactly, Allison.
All right. Well, I'm a retired educator, and I'm trying to do what they say, which is give people wait time, give students wait time. But I think also we'll move forward for now, if there's no hands up. So the next part of the presentation tonight is actually exactly kind of what Blake was talking about, is these next steps of getting information from others, because we are going to be asking you to share your thoughts on the prioritization level, I guess, of some of these things. And I know you haven't had a lot of time to look them over, but we're just going to do 3 or 4, and we're going to use a Zoom polling tool and to get your thoughts on these action items. You'll see in just a sec. So let me start the first poll, and I'm going to try to launch this. Hopefully you will see this on your screen. If you're viewing on a phone, hopefully it's big enough to see. But in this case, we've got the action items listed for the education and training theme, and you can choose high, medium, or low priority. You're not ranking them. You can choose all of them as high priority or all as low, or anywhere in between with these. So I'll give you a minute or two to give your feedback, and then we'll share the results. And this is anonymous, so no one will know what you chose.
And if there's questions about the polling options or anything, feel free to drop those in the chat as well. And we'll be sure to answer them before we close the poll too, just so people feel good about how they're responding.
We'll go another half minute or so. Looks like the numbers maybe haven't changed of how many are responding. And so with that, Blake, I think I should go ahead and end the poll now and then share the results. So, okay, so I'm going to end the poll. And if all goes well, you will see the results. And what we're going to do after you get a chance to kind of look and see how people prioritize. Again, this was not ranking. This is basically just saying, yeah, I think this is a pretty high priority. This is a high priority or not so much. So and I'm going to show you how the participants, some of the participants in the summit felt about these as well. We just thought that might be interesting to you. So it looks like in most cases, as I'm just scrolling, I have to scroll to see them all. Many of these did get a high priority of importance. Oh, there's Maya, I'll admit her. But anyway, so we'll take a look at this, and I think, and Blake, you were going to try to capture this just so we have the numbers. Awesome, she's got it. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing, and hopefully this is working out okay. Now, the next slide is actually the participants of the survey, of the summit, were sent this survey a few weeks after the summit, once we had time to kind of condense everything and analyze it. And what you're seeing are the percent of those who responded, and it was about a quarter of those that actually were in the summit. So not even, I don't know, about 15 respondents. But it's the percent that gave these a high priority. So it's, if you want to look at it relatively, the one in this situation was more collaborating with professional medical organizations to develop education tools. So try to do more with the medical community, neurologists and physicians, to educate them more on clinical trials. And I think one of the things was early diagnosis that came up as an importance. But there you see the breakdown of our participants in the summit. Now, let's go on to the second one. And this question, I want you to, this is the context. How can we create new and evolve, change, improve existing clinical trial resources? And so I'm going to launch the poll for those, and we'll get your feedback.
And Pete, why don't we, before we move into the next poll after this, we can do just a quick check-in.
Sounds good. Go about another 30 seconds or so. Okay, well, thank you for those who responded. I'm going to end it, and then we'll share the results. we'll get through this. We'll check the chat as soon as we're finished with this theme. So there you can see, I hope, the results. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing, and we are going to go then to the summit participants and what they thought about these. And in this case, the wording may be a little different on the survey. It may not be exactly the same, but in this case, you can see that 100% of the folks that were at the summit gave a high priority to improving clinical trial resources for under-resourced, underrepresented populations. Doesn't mean we won't do the things that don't get a high priority, but we're trying to identify, what can everyone get behind. So with that in mind, Blake, do you want to then read the chat? And I don't know if there was a hand up, but let's pause now.
Yeah, we just had one thing from Lori in the chat. She said, just a comment, in the past 6 years since my husband was diagnosed, the ALS landscape has changed in a positive way. More patients have become advocates. Pharma is engaging patients on their advisory boards. Clinicians are more engaged with patients because patients have become better educated, and organizations are collaborating together more and more. We still have work to do, but things are changing for the better. The more advocates we have in the fight, the more we can accomplish. And that gets us up to speed in the chat.
Okay. And I don't know, Allison, I thought I saw you had raised your hand. Did you want to comment on anything, or no? It's okay if not.
Yes, Pete, I'm sorry. May I take us back one to the question before and just ask a question? The end results from investing in education and training, that's a huge initiative right now. I know, like in NEALS, a lot of new education coming out. And the educators are defined as the NEALS members. So clinicians and scientists creating resources and educating the community, like the neurologists that aren't ALS specialists and the patient community. Is that what this means? Or are you talking about us educating clinicians on other things? Which way does it go, or both?
I think both is what, and jump in anyone else on the team or anyone who was at the summit. But I think the clear message was that education has to go both ways. We have to, and I think if anything, it might, and I hope I'm not wrong, have leaned more towards educating the healthcare providers, because very often we hear that people with ALS, when they're newly diagnosed, are not getting a lot of information, if any, on clinical trials. Some sites, yes, but some, and again, this is where it goes to those areas where they don't see it a lot. They're not near the clinics. But the education has to go both ways, if that helps. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in too, Pete and Allison. I think all these organizations are doing a phenomenal job. Repetition is important, and as Pete said, going both ways with this. We're hearing from the patient population that they're not getting the information they need, and we're certainly hearing from the medical professionals they're not hearing from the patient population what is required of them. So opening up those bridges and availability on both sides is important.
And Allison says, thank you for your clarification.
Awesome. It's interesting not to vary, but it's right on this idea. Just today, I think it was the American Association of Neurologists posted a link to a training that was designed by med students for neurologists or neurology students about diagnosing Huntington's disease. And that's exactly the type of thing that it may exist for ALS, but those are the kinds of things that we need. So that was designed to, share for either new doctors or existing doctors, so they could diagnose more quickly.
And then Tim says both, especially clinicians who are not already ALS savvy.
Yeah. Okay, so the final poll we're going to do is under the last theme on collaboration. So as kind of a framework question, how should we champion and enhance collaboration to improve ALS clinical trials? And I'm going to launch the poll so you'll see the actions again. Okay, we'll go about another 30 seconds on this.
I don't quite understand number 3, untitled question, single choice, choice 1 or choice 2. What,
Oh, goodness.
what does that mean?
No
Sorry.
wonder.
So John, I don't know. That was obviously going to be one of them, but it just got it's not there. So I can't remember which one that was.
Right.
No worries on it.
No, I'm not going crazy. Okay.
No.
I
Sorry.
actually think that was just an extra added question. There were only supposed to be 4 options. So
Gotcha.
I think when I was adding them in, I just added and then added another one, but didn't put anything for that. So you can absolutely ignore that.
Okay.
We'll give that low priority. Okay, you guys, I'm going to end the poll now and we'll take a look at the results from this great group. We have plans to present this information to a variety of groups. For this first one, we just kind of put it out there. And so we could be getting people from all different stakeholder groups. But in some cases, we may present to a veterans group, or we may present to a physicians group or something like that. It'll be interesting to see how these change. But I appreciate that you guys doing this. I'm going to stop sharing and close this off, and then let's go to see what the summit participants felt. And it looks like the protocols looks like in general, the folks who responded were saying more of them said though that would be a high priority, and then the patient advisory boards as well as a way of collaborating patients with the drug trial developers. So a little bit about their thoughts. Okay, so what we're going to do, I'm going to back up one here. So what we're going to do now, I think is neat. We're going to see examples of these different themes that are already in practice. And some of you may already be aware of these. Some might be new to you. And we're going to bring Tim back for this, and Jill Bratton's going to join us to talk about some of them. And so I'll try to keep up on clicking the slides at the right time. So Tim, I believe if you're ready, you'll be talking about this slide.
Tim, before you get started, I'm just going to read from the chat real quick.
Great, thanks.
Allison said, Tim, I think we need to work with medical professionals in ALS to do this. Do you agree? And Tim says yes. And then Allison said, these polls are great. Thank you for adding them in.
What is underway, you ask? The Tim Lowry ALS panel series reaches out to healthcare students across the country, virtually giving an ALS 101 overview while having discussions with students about what it's like living with ALS. The Ask Me Anything series has included clinical trials. Last week, we had one to share experiences applying for trials, along with an opportunity for people to ask their questions. Other topics have included feeding tubes, mental health, technology, and tracheostomy issues. On these panel discussions, you can ask literally anything. In these two projects, we are attempting to reach groups of people in need of the resources to better care for patients or to help people navigate this disease. Now I'm going to pass on to Jill to continue.
Thanks, Tim. I appreciate it. You know, one of the other ways that we are investing in education and training is by partnering with the Veterans Administration. My husband, Dave, was a Vietnam veteran and was diagnosed with ALS in May of 2015. Dave passed from this horrible disease in January of 2019. And although we received exceptional care at our local VA, we were told that since the VA did not participate in clinical trials, they couldn't recommend anything specific for us, and we had to look elsewhere. When I joined the AM ALS, I began work with the veterans team, and actually at the same time, the VA established an ALS executive team, and they were working to elevate care for veterans at all VA medical centers. Through open collaboration of both teams, we have been able to help the VA ALS executive team with their goals, which include having a professionally trained clinical coordinator at each ALS clinic within the VA system, getting more information to veterans about their disease, and then finally, and most importantly, getting more veterans in clinical trials. I've presented on the VA ECHO series, which is a nationwide educational forum, and regarding clinical trials and other information for veterans. Also, the AM ALS veterans team has 2 representatives on the VA ALS executive team, so that collaboration is working nicely. Of course, none of this work is possible without the Morris principles. As Pete mentioned at the top of the hour, Sandy Morris was a force in our movement and will always continue to be. The Morris principles were written by a team of advocates, people living with and impacted by ALS, and of course, led by Sandy Morris. Modeled after the Denver principles from the AIDS movement, the Morris principles state, today, we unite as leaders to end ALS. We take ownership of our disease so that the road to cures is faster, equitable, and more humane. The principles go on to say, we will protect our intellectual, physical, and financial dignity, be global stewards of our disease and respected partners in the science of treatments and cures, act as trusted peers with clinicians, researchers, and policymakers, fight for equity in decision-making, and lead to end ALS. With target audiences of healthcare professionals, scientific and research communities, legislators and regulators, and nonprofit organizations, our goals with the Morris principles are to acknowledge and amplify supporters and educate and encourage non-supporters to change behavior. Simply put, there will be nothing about us without us. Now I'm going to send it back to Pete, who will talk about our second cross-cutting theme.
Awesome. Thank you, Jill. Blake, I see little indications there may be new chat entries. Do you want to read those?
You got it. Lori says a shout out to Tim and the community outreach team who created the panels. It is a great vehicle for people to ask questions and learn about real life experiences relative to ALS. And then Lori also said the VA Echo series is incredible. The VA team has worked endlessly to make an impact. And Allison says, Jill, you are amazing. Thank you for all you do and staying in this fight.
Awesome. Thank you. So on the second theme, which involves working with clinical trial resources and improving or creating them if one needs to be created, there's a couple of great resources that are already out there. And the ones I'm going to show you relate to basically their clinical trial databases. The first one you're seeing there is a screenshot of the ALS, the AM ALS signal clinical trial dashboard. And it may be a little hard to see depending on the size of the screen, but it is filterable on a variety of criteria, the location of the trial, what the drug is, what phase the drug is, and so on. And also there's a section there, I'll make it a little bigger here, where you can look at the drugs being tested that have expanded access studies associated. So there's a lot of information. You click on it and it will, provide more information about the trial. Another similar dashboard, if you will, is from the ALS Therapy Development Institute. And this is their clinical trial finder tool. Again, similar, filterable in a variety of ways. But one of the things, if you happen to be a person who's newly diagnosed with ALS and you're starting to look, as people do, they look for possible trials to become part of. Some of this can be overwhelming if you're not familiar with the terminology and so on. So there's likely work to be done to try to have some kind of interface. So these are a little more patient friendly. In terms of outreach to populations that are underrepresented or under-resourced, AM ALS has an outreach and inclusion initiative that has a few different prongs to it. And basically, they're looking at trying to get information and engage the people of color, Black and African American folks who are underrepresented in the clinical trial system. Another group is, and sometimes there's overlap, are people that live in more rural areas. And we've talked about, geographically, they're isolated just by distance, by miles. And so one of the things that the Outreach and Inclusion Initiative is doing, they've identified some relatively big cities in areas where there's a lot of space around them, and you can see them on that map. And they're reaching out to those. They're trying to have what they call deserts of care panels. Again, getting in touch with, as Tim mentioned, healthcare providers, students, clinics, and things like that. So there's work being done, but there's a lot more work in terms of outreach to the underrepresented populations. And finally, an example of collaboration, and there are many, so many of these events and advocacy things have multiple organizations involved in them. But one good example are the geospatial hub maps developed by Pat Dolan, a man with ALS, and his colleagues who are these GIS whizzes when it comes to overlapping information onto maps. And they've created 15 or more maps that, if you haven't seen them, they're incredible. We'll have a link in the follow-up resources. But you can click and filter and sort and overlay maps. And what you're seeing here, the one on the left, I guess the title tells it, is where there are ALS clinics and MDA clinics. And you can see that the central part of the country, west of the Mississippi, there's long distances between them. And then gaps in care, it kind of mirrors that in a way. But there are people with ALS in all across the country. And if we're not working to find ways to include them in the clinical trial system, then we're missing out on they're missing out on possible treatments and help, and the community as a whole is missing out on the science that can be learned from including those people. So that's a great example of collaboration. This now kind of concludes our presentation of information on the Action Summit, and hopefully you've learned some things about it. And but what we're hoping now is that there can be either some conversations, some comments, maybe there are more questions that need to be asked. And so I'll pause and maybe Blake, I don't know if there's I don't think there's anything more to share. So maybe I'll stop sharing my screen if that's, I don't know that there's anything else there other than I think we had a big thank you for joining us. So thanks.
And I'll just read from the chat real quick. One second. Debbie says this is very educational. Thank you. And Lori says we would love to get your feedback. And I'll also share if people are still processing and want to share feedback via email later, you are more than welcome to do that. And I will put the email in the chat. I see Allison's hand is raised. Allison, I will let you take over.
Yeah, thank you, Pete. You did such a great job. You are so easy to listen to and you laid everything out so articulately. Thank you so much. One suggestion I have, I don't know who you're going to be meeting with or sharing things with. Something that I think would be really powerful is if under each of these areas, I mean, they're all areas that everybody talks about all the time. They're not going to be a surprise to anybody. So to maybe show other organizations and the great work they're already doing in those areas and how we can collaborate, like bring people in by acknowledging the work that's being done currently. And to Lori's point, how much has been done. And then let's talk about what we need to do from here and how we get it done together. I think that would be a really powerful statement.
That's, yeah, a great point. There is so much good work being done, but yet the summit, you know, when you're hearing people talk about it, there's still too many people reporting the same things that they might have reported, you know, 10 years ago with their experiences. So that's a great point, Allison. Thank you.
In the chat, Lori said, agree with Allison. Faith says another vote for, and Lori also said, we welcome any ideas. If you're interested in joining the team and working on some of the actionable solutions, definitely please let us know. Faith says another vote for collaboration. We need to work together with everyone involved. Knowledge is power. Kate, before I pass it over to you, we did have a question that came through. I also see some people from our clinical trials teams that might be able to help answer this one. But the question is, what has been your biggest obstacle in collaborating with sponsors? And Courtney, if you could just clarify, do you mean like pharma organizations, or just provide a little clarification, maybe there might be helpful. But if anyone from our team wants to help answer that, feel free to chime in.
Sure. Yeah, I'm actually asking from the standpoint of being a sponsor representative. So within a pharmaceutical company, what has been your biggest obstacle working with pharma companies?
This is Lori. Can I just a quick response to that? I think there's definitely been a shift, and I think things are getting better where more of us who are part of the AM ALS team, various different teams, our voices are being heard, and pharma is much more open and willing to collaborate with us, because I think that they really they see the need for the patient voice to be at the table. And so, speaking from my own experience, I sit on a couple of patient advisory boards, and I think the more we attend, you know, some of these webinars, and the more we engage with pharma, the more willing they are to engage us as patients. So I don't know that there's necessarily a barrier or an obstacle, but I think the more we involve ourselves as advocates on some of these calls, working with pharma companies, the better the outcome will be in terms of like what we believe, and sort of following the Morris principles, like what we believe is important to us and how we can collaborate. Because at the end of the day, we as a group of advocates are going to spread the word and make sure that people, patients, caregivers, understand, you know, the importance of clinical trials, but also the need for, especially for people who are newly diagnosed, to be involved in the clinical trial. So I think it's gotten a lot better. And I think that the more we as advocates put our voices out there and show our interest in working with them, the more receptive they've become. At least that's my experience. So if anyone else has anything to share, you know, that would be great.
I
Jill,
agree, Lori and Rob, and several folks are on the clinical team where we're interacting with the companies, that the responses recently have been very, I think, very positive. And one of the challenges, Courtney, is getting to them before they're too far into their trial. So they can't shift the design. You know, it's too late to change the design. So the sooner we can get in touch with them, the better.
Jill says it's also important to get involved at the point of trial design.
Yeah. Sorry, Jill.
+1 for that then.
I see that Kate has her hand up.
Hi, yeah. So my name's Kate Peters, and I'm on the VA team in AM ALS, and we're actually just getting a collaboration started right now. And Blake, I think you were on the emails as well, and I'm trying to organize a meeting time for everyone. But I just want to double check that we're not creating double work, or to kind of see input from everyone for how we can make this the best collaboration possible. But basically what we're trying to do is get together with the many shades of ALS, and excuse the background noise, I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. And so we're gonna try to get the VA team together with the many shades of ALS and try to find a way, because these are 2 underrepresented populations in clinical trials. And so we want to kind of collaborate and talk about how we can get more inclusion in clinical trials and things like that. So if anyone wants to be involved with that, and also just to make sure that we're not already kind of, meeting that need in the clinical trials team or committee and that kind of thing. So I just want to throw that out there, that if anyone wants to join, and or if anyone thinks that maybe our efforts can be directed differently or better.
Yeah, so Kate, you bring up a really good point, and I think that one way that I think would be really helpful is if the VA team and many shades, and then our subcommittee got involved together and work collaboratively, we can share some thoughts and ideas, and we can work together. So we should probably set something up so that we can meet and discuss some of these things. And I think, it would be really, really helpful for everybody.
Great, thank you, Lori. I'm gonna message you in the chat directly and send you my email address. And then, because we're planning on getting together next week for a Zoom call, and I'll just make sure that we make it a time that everyone who wants to be involved.
And we're fortunate enough to have Jill on our team, and she's also one of the leading members of the VA team. So I think that that'll be a really good place to start.
Great,
Does anyone else have any questions? I know we're right at the top of the hour, but I just want to be mindful in case anybody has any comments or questions. You guys can always email us as well. So yeah, so if anybody left on the call would like to add anything, you guys are our first webinar to the community, so we really welcome any feedback.
Yeah, we really appreciate you guys tuning in tonight. And this was never meant to be a clinical trials 101, but I think you guys were aware of that. And I can just tell from the questions and comments. And I know we will be. This is not something we're going to do all within our own little sub team or even within AM ALS. It's much broader than that, but we got to keep working, and we've got to put some of these things into action. Things have improved, but there's room for improvement, I guess.
I think there's always work to do. And I think as we have newly diagnosed people, it's just that much more important to have these collaborations that we can get the information out to everybody. So again, I'll just second what everyone said. Thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you guys all so much. Keep an eye out for the post-event resource with the recording, and definitely reach out if there's any questions. The email will be included in that resource too. Have a great rest of your evening. John says, thanks to all who put this together. John and Courtney said this was great. Thank you for organizing, and I'm looking forward to sharing this insight with my team. Yeah, and I'll add one more thing too. I think it's been said a little bit before, but if there are groups that you are interested in bringing this presentation to, we would love to work with you to do that as well. So.
And then Deb Lauer just said, this was wonderful, Lori, as someone who has done a lot of presentations for executives of a large company, I can say this was concise and easy to understand, powerful. Okay, well, that just made my evening. I'm gonna go, pour myself a glass of wine and toast everybody on our team and applaud them for the great work that we've done. Really, so impressed and so proud with everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good
Thanks,
evening.
everyone. Have a great night. Bye now.